With the original planned release date of Starfield recently passing us by, it's time to take another look at the details surrounding this game. In this video, I'll be breaking down the reasons I personally am feeling a little trepidatious towards Starfield's release, whether it be due to content we've seen thus far or just stuff with Bethesda and the modern gaming community in general. Now, before we begin, I just want to put it out there. I am really looking forward to hopefully getting to experience Starfield next year in 2023, and for any of the negative points I'll be making in this video, I will do my best to back it up with positivity and hope. That being said, I think it's important to temper our expectations somewhat. The failure of Cyberpunk 2077, for example, was largely down to the negative press wherein people were so fixated on complaining about the game they didn't get that most were blinded to many of the more brilliant features standing right in front of them. With that in mind, let's jump straight into the specific reasons as to why I'm worried about Starfield. First up, this is a brand new IP that Bethesda Softworks is working on, and whilst that is incredibly exciting, it will likely come with a lot of drawbacks. This game is incorporating a bunch of new mechanics, the likes of which we've never seen across Skyrim and Fallout. Whilst I imagine that RPG and story elements will be a blast to experience in this setting, it's not clear how they'll deal with new mechanics like piloting starships. The gameplay actually makes this mechanic sound very promising. We know from the trailer that there are a ton of customization options for building spaceships in this game, all of which affect stats like speed, armor, damage output, jump range, and more. However, it'll be interesting to see how this gels with the more classic Bethesda elements. For example, I wonder whether starships will remain a more basic game mechanic, allowing us to simply traverse from planet A to planet B, or whether Bethesda will implement any versatility to move around the ship during spaceflight, for example, letting us chat to followers about the last mission and such. The thing about brand new IPs is that they give the studio both the immense challenge and opportunity of working within completely uncharted territory. I'm looking at games like Cyberpunk 2077 here, which is unsurprising seeing as it's currently the bulk of this channel's success. The problem that game had is that the studio were working with completely new dynamics, with their promises and visions ultimately being held back by restrictions of what technology would allow. CD Projekt Red bit off far more than they could chew with Cyberpunk and ultimately promised far too much. With the fact that the Starfield gameplay reveal has given us insight into so many of the game's mechanics, I simply hope that Bethesda haven't made that same mistake and won't eventually release the game having dialed back a bunch of the stuff they showcased here, which is literally exactly what Cyberpunk did. I shouldn't worry though. Two game studios of this caliber wouldn't possibly make the exact same mistake as one another within a couple years, right? Right? There's no doubt, this game boasts an incredible scale of ambition, with Todd Howard claiming there's over 1,000 planets to explore. Now, that sounds utterly gargantuan, and suggests that we as players will surely never be able to explore all of each planet, unlike Skyrim and Fallout wherein we've scoured the game maps dry. The difference here though is that the vast majority of these environments look utterly empty, to be honest, as we see with this biome showcase segment in the trailer. Whilst it makes sense in a game such as this that the majority of planets would be desolate, it makes me question exactly what this scale will mean. Is the majority of our time going to be spent traversing arid landscapes? It makes me think back to the Mako segments of Mass Effect 1, wherein we did much the same thing, and that was pretty boring, not gonna lie. I think it's clear by now that when it comes to game worlds, we don't want unfathomable scale at the price of barely any detail. If you offered me the choice between 20 square miles of empty plains or 5 square miles comprised of fields, cottages, a town, caves, and enemy camps, I'd choose the latter any day. That's because whilst 20 square miles has a lot more scale, it's not going to be as fun to traverse simply as there's not really anything to grab my attention and keep my mind occupied. Whilst the scale is certainly impressive, yes, it's now a question of exactly how much there'll be to discover across those 1,000 planets. I can't help but look at Starfield and compare it to No Man's Sky. And perhaps the controversial release of that game is actually serving as a detriment to people's opinions regarding Starfield. That being said, they're not exactly doing much to hide the similarities these games have. Heavy focus on spaceflight, check. Resource mining, check. Base building, check. Heavy focus on varying planetary biomes, check. Need I go on? Unfortunately, when No Man's Sky released, it was an incredibly shallow experience. Whilst there were many different environments to explore, the gameplay mechanics and lack of objective meant it got boring very quickly. I personally managed to get 24 hours into that game before finding it far too repetitive and putting it down, and I think that's quite a long time compared to most people. Don't worry, I'm not criticising No Man's Sky as it is now. I know Hello Games have spent years transforming it into their initial promise, and truly a big fair play to them. I can't wait to jump back into it sometime. Now, Starfield does of course have a lot more things going for it that No Man's Sky didn't. We already saw from the trailer that there's going to be a bunch of different factions to join that we can choose from, as well as a main storyline of some sort. Seeing this as a Bethesda game, it's safe to say that it's going to be one big old questathon, and undoubtedly littered with enough clear-cut content to keep us occupied for months. But what happens when we've whittled down all of the larger main and side quests in the game? How many planets will we have explored, and how much left will there be to discover? I'm looking at the stupidly large number of Elder Scrolls and Fallout videos we've gotten over the years, delving into the biggest conspiracies and most obscure Easter eggs. Can Starfield keep to that trend? How many secrets can Bethesda have possibly hand-placed across these 1,000 or so planets? It's not a question of their efforts, I'm sure it's been a tireless task. I'm merely assessing the sheer practicality of populating a space this large with abundant, meaningful encounters. I fear that finding secrets throughout much of this game will be like finding a needle in a haystack. On a more uplifting note though, Todd Howard has said that 250,000 lines of dialogue have been recorded for Starfield. That's over 4 times more than the 60,000 recorded for Skyrim. Then again, scaling dialogue up by 4 is a much smaller increment than scaling the province of Skyrim up to 1,000 planets. Though, in fairness, I'm sure many of these will be uninhabited and can harbour secrets without necessarily needing dialogue. That being said, a lot of Skyrim was uninhabited and did the same. If populating our local star cluster with things to discover is done right, Starfield will no doubt look like the Mariana Trench, whilst making Elder Scrolls and Fallout games look like a paddling pool. It's a big if though. Another thing to note here is that over the years, Bethesda games have continued upon a general trajectory of becoming more and more watered down in terms of complexity. This meme, comparing a made-up quest log entry across Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, sums this up perfectly, with the details and story regarding the hows and whys of this mission becoming less and less for the sake of simplicity. Now, a bit of simplification wasn't necessarily a bad thing at first. Morrowind is both loved and hated for its lack of handholding, with some enjoying the challenge and thought needed, and others just wanting a fun and casual experience. I think the overwhelming continued success of Skyrim is largely down to striking the right balance between depth and simplicity. Whilst the world is rich with things to discover for those inclined to head off the beaten track, mechanics like quest markers make the game accessible to casual players as well. I'm not saying Skyrim is hands down the best game, just that it's probably the most accessible and balanced for both types of players. Let me know your favourite Bethesda game in the comments and we'll have a chat about why it's great. Unfortunately, when we get onto Bethesda's next title, Fallout 4, that balance has tipped in my opinion. It's certainly an enjoyable experience still, don't get me wrong. I've had 95 great hours of fun with it according to Steam. It's just, well, a bit too handheld in my opinion. Case in point, the top secret railroad organization can be found by literally following a red line leading directly to their base, with letters placed on the ground at certain intervals spelling out railroad. This, it turns out, is their top secret password, which is so dumb because it's also their username and it's written out plain to see. It's not encoded. It's just, it's not a secret organization, is it? I mean, come on. Couple this with the incredibly repetitive Minutemen storyline.
How about the settlement problem? Another settlement needs our help. I'll mark it on your map.
As well as the fact that power armor, one of the most OP things in Fallout, is immediately available with 0 skill or experience required to use it. Fallout 4 just felt like a tipping point, wherein everything does fall into your lap just a little too easily. Since Starfield is the first single-player RPG that Bethesda have released since then, I just hope they'll have backpedaled a bit, and this game will feature a bit more complexity and consequential choices we can make. This does currently seem promising, actually, as Todd Howard says. Dialogue has returned to, quote, a classic Bethesda-style dialogue, end quote. In terms of the scope of varying game options and outcomes, it's less clear. With a game of this scale especially, being too handheld and forcing players into certain options could potentially kill a lot of the freedom and exploration aspects. Remember Megaton in Fallout 3? Of course you do, it's one of the most talked about parts of that game. I miss having the power to make decisions like Megaton. But imagine that instead of deciding the fate of a town, we could decide the fate of a planet. I'm not complaining about the fact that the game has been delayed. Honestly, it's a good thing. A really good thing, perhaps. If your game isn't ready, then there's absolutely no shame in pushing back release until it is. The worry I have here is that delays can be slippery slopes. The further developers get from their initially planned release, the more pressure there is to get the game out there. Currently, Starfield is set for a release window in the first half of 2023. That's any time until the end of June. As the end of that window draws nearer though, we've got to ask, what will Bethesda do if it's still not ready? Do they push it back until the second half of 2023. That may be preferable to me and any other people that experience Cyberpunk 2077 or No Man's Sky on release, but even then, if you keep teasing a game and building hype for it before continually pushing it back, people's patience will start to run thin. The alternative is to cut some things, hope to patch them back in later, and release the game as an underwhelming shadow of the initial promise. It's a rock and a hard place scenario. Keep on developing and some will get impatient and pissed off. Release too early and, well, if the negativity surrounding the release of Cyberpunk 2077 is anything to go by, that's much more of a shitstorm. All I can say right now is that I'm grateful they're giving more time to this game, but will it be enough? They've had 7 years to work on it, sure, but with a game of this scale, we can only guess how much more time is needed. I'd like to top this video off with a bit of hope for Starfield. Firstly, whilst a new IP comes with the caveats and kinks of a development studio working outside of their comfort zone, it's also going to be a breath of fresh air. Not only will Bethesda have casting spells, fighting dragons, and surviving radiation under their belts, we'll now be able to fly spaceships, explore the skies, and spaces beyond. Second, despite the fact that Bethesda has had its ups and downs in terms of releases, they are yet to make a genuinely bad game in my opinion. Fallout 4 may be oversimplified, but it's still a very enjoyable game for its part. There's no doubt in my mind that Starfield will most certainly be fun to experience, with the various features of a Bethesda game we all know and love in a brand new setting. The first playthrough at least will be so wrapped up with showing us all the new stuff on offer that we hopefully won't have time to notice so many issues. If a game can have things like flying mammoths, plates that glitch through walls, as well as giants that send us to space, and that one can still be lauded and beloved so much as to warrant 5 re-releases, then there is a lot of room for hope yet. I just hope that, like Skyrim, there's going to be enough versatility for a heavy replayability aspect. Finally, no matter if this game is padded with far too much procedurally generated fluff, or is genuinely an endless 1,000 planet pool of hidden Easter eggs, whatever the case, it will no doubt breed a whole new community of players, forums, memes, and content creators. I myself am planning on doing more Starfield content when it releases, as well as the odd video beforehand, here and there, when we get fresh news and updates type thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Starfield, as I'm genuinely not that aware of the community's attitude towards this game. Comment down below your thoughts and ideas. Do you think this game will be an imaginative but ultimately shallow experience, or do you think it'll be a revolution to make gaming history? This video is a bit of a change from my usual Cyberpunk content, but if you've enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, as it will let me know that you're also interested in more content like this. Furthermore, if you're a fan of Cyberpunk 2077 or are wanting more content on Starfield both before and after its release, then please hit that subscribe button and notification bell to stay up to date on all my future videos. Thanks for watching. I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you in another video.